The cafe looked ordinary in every way. Morning light poured through the front windows, landing softly on wooden tables and half-finished coffee cup. A bell rang as the door opened and closed over and over again. People talked, laughed, scrolled on their phones. No one was paying attention to anyone else. That's exactly why he chose this place. Keanu Reeves stepped inside quietly. No suit, no sunglasses, no security. Just a faded jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, and tired shoes that had clearly walked more than red carpets ever had. He blended in so well that even the barista barely glanced up when he joined the short line. This wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't a photo op. He just wanted breakfast. A simple piece of toast. That was it. As he waited, Keanu scanned the room out of habit. Not nervously, calmly. The way someone does when they've spent years being watched and learned how to disappear when they needed to. Two students arguing about music near the window. A man in a suit typing aggressively on his phone. An older woman stirring her coffee slowly, staring into nothing. Normal people. Normal lives. Keanu liked that. When it was his turn, he stepped forward and spoke softly. "Just toast, please." The barista nodded without recognition and turned around. The sound of the toaster clicking down filled the air. Plates clinked. Someone called out another order. Everything stayed normal. Then it happened. A whisper, so quiet it almost disappeared into the noise of the cafe. Almost, but not quite. Keanu's eyes shifted slightly, not toward the counter but downward. His jaw tightened for just a second. He hadn't imagined it. The whisper came again. This time closer, not loud, not dramatic, just enough to reach him. Whatever was said, it wasn't meant for the room. It was meant for him. Keanu froze. Not in panic. In recognition. His hand, still resting on the counter, stopped moving. The warmth of the coffee cup no longer mattered. The casual morning he had stepped into was gone. The cafe kept buzzing around him, completely unaware. No one noticed the change in his posture. No one noticed his breath slow. No one noticed that a man who had faced cameras, fame, and loss without flinching was now standing perfectly still. Because of one quiet whisper behind the counter. And whatever it meant, Keanu already knew this wasn't going to be just breakfast anymore. The cafe didn't change. That was the strangest part. The toaster popped. A cup slid across the counter. Someone laughed too loudly near the door. The bell rang again as another customer walked in, shaking rain off their jacket. Life kept moving. Only Keanu didn't. He stood there, still facing forward, as if nothing had happened. Anyone watching would have thought he was just waiting for his order, lost in thought like everyone else in the room. But something inside him had shifted. He'd heard whispers before, on movie sets, at airports, in crowds that thought he couldn't hear them. This wasn't that. This whisper didn't carry excitement. It didn't sound impressed. It wasn't even curious. It was careful. Keanu focused on the counter in front of him. The small crack in the wood, the faded sticker near the register, the reflection of overhead lights in the glass display. He didn't turn around. Not yet. Behind the counter, the staff moved quickly, calling out orders, reaching for cups, wiping spills. On the surface, everything looked normal, too normal. The whisper came again, short, controlled, almost like a reminder. Keanu felt a familiar tightness in his chest, not fear but memory, the kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just shows up, uninvited. He shifted his weight slightly, enough to change his angle without drawing attention. His eyes flicked to the reflection in the glass, just enough to catch movement. Someone behind the counter had gone still. Not frozen, composed. A woman, mid-30s maybe, hair pulled back, apron tied too tight around her waist. She wasn't looking at him directly. She was pretending to focus on the register, fingers resting on the keys without pressing anything. People who are nervous fidget. She didn't. That's what stood out. Keanu had spent years around cameras and crowds. He could read stillness better than noise, and this stillness was intentional. The cafe grew louder, somehow, as his awareness narrowed. Milk steamed. Orders stacked up. Someone sighed impatiently behind him in line. Still, no one noticed, and that's when it hit him. This place wasn't random. He had walked in for toast, sure, but she had been ready before he spoke. Before he ordered. Before he even reached the counter. The whisper hadn't been a reaction. It had been a confirmation. Keanu exhaled slowly through his nose, careful not to show anything on his face. Fame teaches you that reactions belong to the audience. Control belongs to you. He waited. Seconds passed. The woman finally moved again, handing a drink to another customer, smiling politely, acting like nothing was wrong, but her eyes flicked toward him for half a second, not with surprise, not with admiration, with recognition, not of a celebrity, of a person. And that's when the room started to feel smaller. Keanu didn't rush. He didn't speak. He let the silence do the work. Silence is weight if you let it sit long enough. Behind him, the line shuffled forward. Someone cleared their throat. Still, he stayed. If you were famous, would you ever go out like this alone, unnoticed? Yes or no? The toaster clicked again. The woman reached for a plate and set toast down carefully, like the movement mattered more than it should have. She slid it toward the counter, stopping just short of him. Toast, she said, neutral, professional, but her voice wasn't steady. Keanu finally turned his head slightly. Not enough to face her fully, just enough to acknowledge the space between them. Up close, he could see it now. The tension in her jaw, the way her shoulders stayed squared, the effort it took for her to keep her breathing even. This wasn't excitement. This was someone standing in front of something unfinished. Keanu nodded once, a small gesture, and placed his hand near the plate. His fingers hovered there for a moment instead of grabbing it. The pause wasn't accidental. The woman noticed. Her eyes met his for the first time. And in that brief moment, shorter than a blink, everything unsaid rushed to the surface. Years, a memory, a moment that had clearly stayed with her long after it had left him. The cafe noise faded again, just enough. Keanu's expression didn't change. It rarely did. But his eyes softened in a way cameras could never quite capture. He understood now. The whisper wasn't meant to expose him. It was meant to test him. To see if he remembered. To see if he was still the same man she thought he was. He picked up the plate slowly, careful, deliberate. As if giving both of them time to prepare for what came next. Whatever this was, it wasn't about toast anymore. And whatever she was holding on to. Keanu knew it was time to finally acknowledge it. Keanu held the plate of toast in his hands, but he didn't move away from the counter. Not yet. The woman behind the register adjusted the screen in front of her, pretending to check something. The glow reflected faintly on her face, but her eyes weren't reading numbers. They were fixed on the past. She swallowed once. Then she spoke again quietly, just enough to reach him. You probably don't remember, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't nervous either. It was careful. Like someone opening a door they weren't sure should be opened. Keanu didn't respond right away. He set the plate down on the counter instead of carrying it to a table. The sound of porcelain touching wood was soft, but it landed heavier than expected. I don't remember most days, he said finally. His voice was calm, almost gentle. You'll have to help me. The woman let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly, not with relief but with permission, as if she'd been waiting for him to say exactly that. It was years ago, she continued. Before this place, before I was here. Keanu nodded once. He didn't rush her. He knew better than that. Some memories don't like to be chased. Behind him, the cafe carried on. Someone stirred sugar into a cup. A chair scraped against the floor. A phone rang. Ald was moving. Their moment wasn't. I was working nights back then, she said. Different city. Different job. I didn't recognize you at first either. You were just another guy. There was something almost ironic in the way she said it. Not bitter. Just factual. Keanu listened without interrupting. His eyes stayed on her, steady, present. He had learned long ago that being heard mattered more than being remembered. You came in late, she went on, right before closing. I'd had a bad night. A really bad one. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. The knuckles went pale. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to smile. And when you ordered, I was rude. She paused, searching his face. You didn't deserve it. Keanu gave a small shrug. Happens. She shook her head. Not like this. For the first time, her voice wavered. You noticed, the words hung there. Not dramatic, not loud, but heavy. Keanu's expression changed, not sharply, not visibly, just enough. His brow furrowed slightly, the way it does when something half-forgotten begins to surface. You noticed, she repeated. You asked if I was okay. Keanu closed his eyes for half a second. That was enough. The memory slipped back into place. A diner late night, harsh lights, a woman trying to hold it together behind a counter. He remembered the look, the kind people wear when they're doing everything they can not to fall apart in public. I said no, she continued. Of course I did. People always say no. She gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. But you didn't push, you didn't joke. You didn't tell me to cheer up. Her voice softened. You just said all right. But you don't have to pretend with me. Keanu opened his eyes again. That was definitely him. The cafe noise faded further now, like someone slowly turning down a volume knob. He was aware of the room, but it felt distant, less important. I don't remember what happened after, she said. I just remember that when you left I felt lighter. She paused. Not fixed. Not saved. Just lighter. Keanu swallowed. That was always the part that surprised him, how little it took to matter. You paid, she said, gesturing toward the register. Left a tip. Wrote something on the receipt. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Old, soft at the edges. Clearly handled more than once. I keep it in my wallet, she said. I always have. She hesitated, then unfolded it carefully and turned it toward him. Keanu leaned forward just enough to read it. The handwriting was his, simple, unpolished. You're doing better than you think. Keep going. For a moment he couldn't speak, not because it was profound, but because it was true and he'd forgotten he'd ever said it. I wasn't whispering to expose you, she said softly. I just didn't want anyone else to hear. She met his eyes fully now. I wanted to know if you were still that guy. The question didn't need to be asked out loud. Keanu looked at the note again, then at her. Then around the cafe, the noise, the movement, the ordinary life happening all at once. He smiled. Not the polite kind, not the public one. The real one. I'm still learning, he said. But yeah. She nodded, emotion flickering across her face before she caught it. I thought so. For the first time since he walked in, the tension lifted. But what neither of them realized yet was that this quiet exchange, this almost invisible moment, was about to change more than just the way one woman remembered the past. And it was only just beginning. Keanu stood there for a moment longer than necessary. The note was still between them, resting lightly on the counter, as if neither of them wanted to be the one to move it first. The cafe noise returned slowly, not all at once, but in layers. A spoon clinked. Someone laughed, a chair scraped back. Life resumed. But Keanu hadn't. He folded the paper carefully and slid it back toward her. Not like he was returning something that belonged to him, but like he was handing back something that had done its job. You kept going, he said. It wasn't praise. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. She nodded once, eyes dropping briefly to the counter. Some days were harder than others. He understood that answer. Too well. Keanu picked up his plate of toast again, finally, and stepped to the side so the next customer could move forward. The line shifted. Orders continued. To anyone watching, it looked like a brief, forgettable exchange, the kind that happens 100 times a day in places like this. But something subtle had changed. Keanu didn't head for a table. Instead, he stayed near the counter, leaning casually against it, as if waiting for his coffee or checking his phone. In reality, he was watching the room, not with suspicion, but with intention. This was the moment. He had learned over the years that moments like these don't announce themselves. They don't come with signs or warnings. They arrive quietly, asking a simple question. Are you going to walk away or stay present? Keanu had walked away before. Not out of indifference, out of respect. Sometimes people don't want more. Sometimes the right thing is to let a moment be exactly what it is. But this time felt different. Not urgent, not dangerous, unfinished. Behind the counter, the woman moved with more ease now, but her awareness stayed tuned to him. Not anxious, just attentive. As if she sensed he hadn't fully left yet, not physically and not emotionally. A customer ahead complained about a drink. Another checked their watch impatiently, normal frustrations. Normal noise. Keanu watched how she handled it. Calm, measured, no defensiveness. She had grown since that night years ago. That much was clear. He took a slow breath and made a decision he didn't verbalize. Decisions like this never needed words. When she had a free second, he spoke again, quietly, so only she could hear. You still working nights? She looked up, surprised by the question, then shook her head. No, mornings now. He smiled faintly. Good. It wasn't advice, it wasn't approval. Just acknowledgement. She hesitated, then asked, do you ever get tired of being recognized? Keanu considered that. Sometimes, he said honestly, but moments like this make it easier. She studied his face as if checking whether he meant it. He did. A pause settled between them again, not awkward, not heavy, comfortable. The kind of pause that doesn't rush to be filled. Keanu glanced toward the door. Sunlight streamed in as another customer entered, shaking off the morning chill. For a brief second, he imagined himself leaving, finishing his toast somewhere quiet, letting this remain a small, private exchange. And he could have. No one would have blamed him. But something held him there. Not obligation, not guilt. Responsibility. Not the public kind, the quiet kind. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice further. You said you wanted to know if I was still that guy. She nodded barely. I don't think people stop being who they are, he continued. They just get tired sometimes. Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. I think, he added, what matters is what they do when they notice someone needs space or support. She understood. He wasn't talking about the past anymore. He was talking about now. Keanu straightened, picking up his coffee cup at last. He took a sip, then grimaced slightly. Needs sugar, he said almost apologetically. She smiled, a real one this time, and reached for the bowl. As she slid it toward him, their hands almost touched. Almost. The moment lingered. And then, without fanfare, without anyone else noticing, Keanu Reeves made a quiet choice. He wasn't just going to leave her with a memory. He was going to do something, small, controlled, and intentional, that would make sure this moment didn't end the way so many others did, by being forgotten. As he stirred the sugar into his coffee, his eyes lifted again, scanning the room, the staff, the rhythm of the place. He was ready, not for a confrontation, not for a speech, for something far more powerful, a deliberate action, and whatever came next would be felt long after the toast was gone. The change didn't happen all at once. It never does. At first, it was just a feeling, the kind that passes through a room before anyone can explain it. Conversations didn't stop, but they slowed. Laughter softened. Even the clatter of cups seemed slightly out of rhythm. Keanu stood near the counter, stirring sugar into his coffee with slow, deliberate movements. He wasn't trying to draw attention. If anything, he was doing the opposite. But attention has a way of finding stillness. A man waiting for his order glanced at him, then looked again. Something about the posture felt familiar, the calm, the way he occupied space without needing it. The man frowned slightly, as if a half-remembered thought had brushed past him. Behind the counter, the woman noticed it too. She had relaxed earlier, just enough to breathe. Now, she felt that alertness return, not fear, not anxiety, awareness. The kind you get when a moment starts expanding beyond its original shape. She set a cup down and called out a name. No one moved. She called it again, louder. This time, a woman near the door stepped forward, eyes still fixed on Keanu. She took her drink but didn't look away until she reached her table. Whispers began, not about him, not directly, just the kind that float when curiosity spreads faster than certainty. Is that?
No, it can't be. He looks like.
Keanu heard none of it, or maybe he did, and chose not to acknowledge it. He finished stirring, tapped the spoon lightly against the rim, and set it down. The sound was small, but in the quieting room, it carried. That's when the shift became visible. The woman behind the counter glanced toward the entrance, then back at him. Her hands moved more carefully now. Her smile, when she gave one, was polite, professional, but her eyes stayed serious. She sensed what was happening. The cafe was becoming aware. A pair of teenagers near the window nudged each other, phones half raised, unsure whether to commit. An older man leaned back in his chair, studying Keanu openly now, head tilted. Someone in line whispered a name, not loudly, but clearly enough. Keanu didn't turn. Recognition has a sound. It's not loud, but it's sharp, like a click when something locks into place. The room had reached that point. Still, he didn't react. He took a slow sip of coffee, winced again, and smiled faintly to himself. Behind the counter, the woman shifted her weight. She had lived through enough moments of being unseen to recognize this one for what it was, a moment where power subtly changes hands. Not because of fame, because of attention. A customer spoke up near the register, frustration edging into their voice. Excuse me, I've been waiting. Keanu turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge the interruption without facing it. Sorry, he said calmly. Go ahead. The customer hesitated. Something in his tone, not authority, not impatience, made it impossible to argue. The man nodded, embarrassed, and stepped back. That was the moment people noticed. Not the face, not the whisper, the composure. The room settled into a strange balance, quiet, but not tense, curious but respectful. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something, even if they didn't yet know what. Behind the counter, the woman met Keanu's eyes again. A question passed between them without words. Is this okay? He gave the smallest nod. She exhaled. From the corner of the cafe, a staff member leaned toward her and whispered, Do you know him? She nodded once. Yes, that was all she said. It was enough. The staff member straightened, suddenly more attentive, more careful. Cups were placed gently. Orders were called clearly. The space shifted from casual to considered. Keanu set his cup down and rested his hands lightly on the counter. He wasn't preparing for a speech. He wasn't bracing for confrontation. He was grounding the room. People mirrored it without realizing, standing straighter, lowering voices, waiting. For what, they didn't know. Only that something meaningful was about to happen. The woman behind the counter felt it too. She had started the day expecting nothing more than another shift. Now, she stood at the center of a moment that felt bigger than both of them. And as eyes gathered, whispers faded, and the cafe settled into an almost reverent quiet, Keanu Reeves finally lifted his gaze and prepared to speak. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that would make every person in that room understand exactly why this moment mattered. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't tap a glass or clear his throat. He didn't wait for silence, he simply spoke, and the room leaned in on its own. "Can I say something?" The words were soft, almost casual, but they landed with weight. Conversations stopped. Phones lowered. Even the espresso machine fell quiet, as if someone had turned it off mid-breath. Keanu looked around the cafe, not at any one person in particular. His gaze moved slowly, deliberately, meeting eyes only briefly before moving on. He wasn't searching for attention. He was acknowledging presence. "I won't take much of your time," he continued. "I just want to point something out." He paused. Silence held. "This place feels welcoming," he said. "Most places don't, and that's because of the people working here." A few heads turned toward the counter. The woman froze for half a second, then straightened, unsure how to react. Keanu noticed. "That doesn't happen by accident," he went on. "It happens because someone decides to show up with patience, even when their day doesn't start that way." The room remained still. He wasn't preaching. He wasn't performing. He was speaking the way someone does when they mean every word. "Years ago," he said, "someone behind a counter made it through a hard night. No applause. No recognition. Just endurance." The woman's breath caught. Keanu didn't look at her now. He didn't need to. "And sometimes," he added, "the smallest kindness, the kind no one sees, is what keeps a person moving forward." A man near the door shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how quiet he was standing. Keanu took a breath. "We don't always know what someone's carrying," he said, "but we can choose not to add to it." He turned slightly, finally facing the woman behind the counter. His voice didn't change, still calm, still even. "Thank you," he said simply. The word hung in the air. The woman swallowed, nodding once, eyes shining but steady. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone clapped, just one person. Softly. It stopped almost as soon as it started, but it was enough to break the spell. People shifted. Some smiled, others looked down, thoughtful. The cafe breathed again. Keanu picked up his coffee and toast and stepped back from the counter, clearing space like he always had. He didn't linger. He didn't wait for reactions. He moved toward a small table near the window. As he sat, the woman behind the counter leaned slightly toward her coworker and whispered. He didn't have to do that. The coworker nodded, eyes wide. No, he didn't. Across the room, phones stayed down. No one rushed him. Whatever they'd expected a scene, a moment to capture, it hadn't come. What they got instead was something quieter, something real. Keanu took a bite of toast, chewing slowly, tasting more than bread, the warmth, the simplicity. The fact that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is name what matters. Behind the counter, the woman felt something settle inside her. Not closure, something better. Validation. Not from a crowd. From a person who remembered what it meant to notice. She straightened her apron and called out the next order with a steadier voice. The shift continued. Cups clinked. The register chimed. But the room wasn't the same anymore. People spoke more gently. Thank yous came more often. Eye contact lingered longer than usual. Keanu finished his coffee and stood, slipping his jacket back on. He left cash on the table more than necessary, and folded the receipt once before placing it beneath the cup. As he walked toward the door, the bell rang softly. The woman glanced up just in time to see him pause. He didn't turn around. He didn't wave. He simply said, "Take care." And then he was gone, the door closed behind him. The cafe returned to its rhythm. Orders were filled. Mornings continued. But something invisible had shifted. A reminder had passed through the room, gentle, brief, and undeniable. That attention is a form of respect. That kindness doesn't need an audience. And that sometimes the quietest voices leave the deepest mark. The cafe didn't erupt into noise after Keanu left. That was the surprising part. There was no sudden rush of chatter, no excited speculation, no phones pulled out to replay what had just happened. Instead, The room settled into something quieter, thoughtful, almost gentle, as if everyone was afraid to disturb whatever had passed through. Behind the counter, the woman stood for a moment longer than necessary, hands resting on the edge of the register. She watched the door where he had exited, not hoping he would return, just letting the moment finish its course. Then she took a breath. "Next order," she called out. Her voice didn't shake. A customer stepped forward, smiling more warmly than before. "Thank you," they said, not automatically, but intentionally. She nodded, feeling the difference. It wasn't applause she felt. It wasn't validation from strangers. It was something steadier, respect. As the morning continued, small things began to change. People waited more patiently. Complaints softened into questions. Even the regulars, the ones who usually rushed in and out without looking up, lingered just a little longer. The cafe felt human. During a quiet moment, she reached for her wallet and unfolded the old receipt again. The paper was worn thin now, the ink slightly faded, but the words were still clear. "You're doing better than you think. Keep going." She smiled to herself. For years, that note had been something she returned to privately, a reminder meant only for her. But now, it felt different. Less like a lifeline and more like a shared truth. She folded it carefully and placed it back where it belonged. Across the room, a young woman at a table whispered to her friend, "That was him, right?" Her friend nodded. "Yeah, but not how I expected." The first woman thought about that. Neither had she. Fame had walked through the door that morning, sure, but it hadn't demanded attention. It hadn't changed the room by being loud or impressive. It had changed it by being present. Behind the counter, the woman adjusted her apron and continued working. She didn't feel exposed. She didn't feel small. She felt seen. And that mattered more than she could explain. Later, when the rush slowed and sunlight shifted across the floor, she noticed something else. The receipt. She reached for it absent-mindedly, then realized it wasn't there anymore. Her heart skipped. She checked under the counter, then near the register. Nothing. Then she remembered. He had folded it. She moved quietly to the small table by the window. The cup was gone. The plate was gone. But beneath where they had been sat a new piece of paper. She picked it up. The handwriting was different this time, slower, steadier. Still true, that was all. She laughed softly, pressing the paper to her chest for just a moment before tucking it away. Across town, Keanu walked down the street, hands in his pockets, blending back into the city as easily as he'd entered the cafe. No one followed him. No one stopped him. And that was exactly how he liked it. He hadn't set out to be remembered that morning. He hadn't planned to say anything at all. He just wanted toast. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, it puts you in a place where a small choice can echo longer than you expect. He turned a corner and disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind nothing but a quieter room and a reminder that would stay with everyone who had witnessed it. That strength doesn't always announce itself. That kindness doesn't need to be explained. And that being seen, truly seen, can change the direction of a day, a job, or even a life. Before the video ends, let us ask you something. If you believe small acts of kindness still matter in today's world, type TOAST in the comments. And tell us, where are you watching from today? Because stories like this don't end when the camera cuts. They continue in the way we choose to show up for each other. Quietly, intentionally, and without expecting applause.